Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Fogh Rasmussen. He was Prime Minister of Denmark. He was then Secretary General of NATO between 2009 and 2014. He joins us via satellite from Brussels. Thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Rasmussen, NATO celebrated its 70th birthday at a summit in London a few days ago. Obviously, there was a lot of expectation, tension, one should say, because of the US president asking the allies to pay more money, because of the French president saying NATO was quote-unquote brain dead, and the tensions with Turkey. What's your take on the summit that took place?
My take is that it went better than expected. In advance, there was a clear risk of derailing this meeting between leaders because President Trump, President Macron, President Erdogan had made the actions and statements they did. But they managed to keep the discussions indoor and express a kind of unity towards the outside world. And I appreciate that, because NATO's strength is very much dependent on unity.
Right, but isn't this just pretending? Let's take the declarations of the French president when he says NATO is brain dead. It created a lot of reaction, even in places generally close to France like Germany. Was this a good declaration? Because some say it prompted debate, but clearly it irritated some allies, especially those in Eastern Europe.
No, I don't agree with the French president. He risks that his statement will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because such statements undermines the credibility of NATO's Article 5, according to which all allies will help an ally that might be attacked by another country. But on the other hand, he managed to change the position of President Trump, who all of a sudden feels that NATO is great. And the outcome was also the establishment of an internal expert group, which, under the leadership of the NATO Secretary General, will reflect on the future of NATO during the next 2 years. So I think the leaders managed to get something constructive out of those statements that were not helpful.
Right. What's maybe surprising, as you hinted, is President Trump. We remember him calling NATO obsolete and, in a way, questioning that very Article 5, which is the heart and soul of NATO. Do you think that, in a way, Trump has returned, if I may use, to NATO?
Well, I think one of the reasons why he turned was the provocative statements by President Macron. But another and more substantial reason is that the European allies have actually increased their defense investments during recent years, at least $100 billion more a year. And when we decided in 2014 that all allies will live up to the 2% target, in 2014 only 3 allies did so. I would estimate that by the end of this year, 8 or 9 allies will live up to the 2% target. So in that respect, Trump has had some success with his harsh rhetoric. So I think that's the other reason why he now thinks that NATO is great.
That might change again. One might argue with Donald Trump. You never know. I want to get to Turkey. I mean, is Turkey really a problem for NATO? Obviously, there was what is happening as we speak in northern Syria, but also the fact that Turkey is pushing to buy Russian weapons. Is, in your view, Turkey an ally that can be trusted and has its part as a NATO member?
Well, Turkey is a problem, but Turkey is an ally and Turkey will remain an ally. It would be a big strategic mistake to punish Turkey or try to push out Turkey from NATO. Of course, it is a matter of concern that the Turks purchase Russian military equipment because it risks marginalize Turkey security-wise within NATO, because obviously the Russian military equipment is not compatible with NATO military equipment. As regards Syria, yeah, of course you could wish for more consultation within NATO, but I think that if NATO back in 2012, during my term as NATO Secretary General, when we discussed a possible NATO action in Syria, if we at that time had taken the decision to actually create a no-fly zone or a security zone between Turkey and the rest of Syria, then President Erdogan wouldn't think of going alone right now. But at that time, among other countries, France opposed a NATO action in Syria. So this situation is more nuanced than it's often described in the media. So while Turkey, of course, is a matter of concern, I think we should also take into account the legitimate Turkish security concerns.
Right. Another issue, obviously, is Russia. You were still Secretary General when Russia took control of Crimea. It seems, despite the sanctions, despite the words of Western leaders, that it is essentially a fait accompli right now. There's this situation in eastern Ukraine. There was a summit just a few days ago in Paris. Is Russia toying with NATO in a way?
Well, we were all negatively surprised by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of the illegal annexation of Crimea into the Russian Federation in 2014, and now Russia continues destabilizing eastern Ukraine. So Russia is not a strategic partner. Russia is a strategic adversary, and Russia has fundamentally changed the security situation in the whole of Europe, and we must adapt to that. In that light, I appreciate the summit in the Normandy format in Paris a few days ago, and I hope that could initiate a gradual process towards peace in eastern Ukraine. But the goal must be very clear. Ukraine must regain full control of eastern Ukraine, and we must restore the real border, the internationally recognized border between Ukraine and Russia. Until that has been done, it's not possible to move forward with elections in eastern Ukraine.
Right, but the fact that Crimea has become part of Russia, as I mentioned, now seems to be accepted, even though it will not be publicly acknowledged by the West, and the focus, as you just did, is on eastern Ukraine.
I don't think we should ever recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea into the Russian Federation. In my opinion, it's very similar to what happened during the Second World War, when the Soviet Union illegally annexed the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, into the Soviet Union. We never recognized that, and they regained independence. Today they are members of NATO. No one knows what will happen in the future, but I don't think we should ever recognize the legality of grabbing land by force from your neighbors, as Russia has done. On the other hand, I think we should now focus on creating peace in eastern Ukraine. In my opinion, the solution would be to deploy an international peacekeeping force mandated by the United Nations with a robust mandate to also control the real international border between Ukraine and Russia.
Russia
and
will
to
never
control
accept this.
the influx. No, maybe not, but I think the international community, including France, should put a lot of pressure on Russia. Actually, President Putin himself suggested a peacekeeping force a couple of years ago. Well, it was not a peacekeeping force with a robust mandate, but we could build on that and allow an international peacekeeping force to also control the border between Ukraine and Russia and control the influx of Russian military equipment and military personnel.
Thank you very much, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, for being on the France 24 interview from Brussels, and thank you for watching it. Stay tuned for more news.